Silent prayer. Maria had always been a woman of strong faith. She believed deeply in the power of prayer, and for years she relied on her unwavering trust in God to guide her through life. But recently, everything in her life had begun to fall apart. She had lost her job after a company downsizing, her home was at risk of foreclosure, and her marriage was hanging by a thread. No matter how hard she tried to hold everything together, she could not seem to find a way out of the spiral of despair that was consuming her. Every night, Maria would kneel by her bed, clutching her rosary, and pray fervently. She would ask God for help, for guidance, and for the strength to endure. But as time passed, it felt as if her prayers were falling on deaf ears. The more she prayed, the more distant God seemed. It felt like her words were lost in the vastness of the universe, unanswered and ignored. She began to feel abandoned, as though God had forgotten her, leaving her to struggle on her own. One evening, after yet another long, fruitless day of worrying and crying, Maria found herself standing in her backyard. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue across the sky. The air was cool, and the world seemed to be at peace. But Maria's heart was anything but. She stood there silently, looking up at the heavens, feeling the weight of her burdens pressing down on her. Her thoughts were tangled, her heart heavy, and for the first time, she didn't even know how to pray anymore. She had prayed so many times before, asking for miracles, for answers, but now she was simply too tired to form the words. She felt like a broken vessel, unable to carry the load of her own life. As the silence stretched on, Maria thought about all the times she had questioned her faith, wondered whether it was worth continuing, and whether God was even listening. But then, in the quiet of that moment, something extraordinary happened. It wasn't a loud voice or a thunderous sound, but rather a whisper, soft, gentle, and comforting, that filled her heart. "I am here," it said. The words were not spoken aloud, yet Maria could feel them deep within her soul, a peaceful reassurance that wrapped around her like a warm embrace. She knelt down right there in her backyard, tears streaming down her face, not because of despair, but because of the overwhelming sense of God's presence. She had no words to speak, no prayers to offer, but in that stillness, in that silence, she knew without a doubt that God was with her. She didn't need to speak. He already knew the cries of her heart. The days that followed were nothing short of miraculous. Maria began to notice small, but significant changes in her life. She received a call from a former colleague who offered her a new job at a company that was just starting up. Her husband, who had been distant and detached for months, began to open up, and they started having honest conversations again, working through their issues together. Slowly but surely, the financial burdens that had been hanging over her head began to ease. Maria's faith in God was renewed, but not because her circumstances had changed. She knew that the real miracle was in the silence of her prayer, in the peace that she had received when she let go and trusted. She realized that sometimes the most powerful prayers are the ones we don't speak. We often feel the need to fill our prayers with words, to explain our needs and desires to God. But in truth, God knows our hearts even before we speak. The silent prayer, the prayer of surrender, is the most profound because it is in that moment that we trust in His will and timing, letting go of our own control. Maria's story is a testimony to the fact that faith doesn't always require words. It is often in the silence, in the moments when we feel most vulnerable, that God's presence is felt the strongest. When we let go of our own worries and simply trust that He is there, guiding us, we experience His peace in a way that words can't describe. Meaning of the story. This story highlights the power of silent faith and trust in God. It teaches us that, while words of prayer are important, sometimes the most profound communication with God happens in the quiet moments when we surrender our burdens and simply trust in His presence. Maria's experience shows that even when we feel distant from God, He is always with us, listening to the unspoken cries of our hearts. The story encourages us to remember that faith is not always about asking for miracles with our words, but about trusting that God is present, even in our silence. It also reminds us that God's timing is perfect, and even in our darkest moments, His plan is unfolding. We don't always need to understand how or when things will improve. We simply need to trust that He is in control and that He will guide us when we are ready to listen. Ultimately, this story is about finding peace and surrender and knowing that God is always with us, whether we speak or remain silent.